For as long as I can remember, Thanksgiving at the Whitmore house had been a performance. My mother, Margaret Whitmore, lived for the grand table settings, the golden turkey centerpieces, and the carefully staged photographs that made her life appear picture perfect. She never admitted it outright, but for her, the holiday wasn't about gratitude. It was about appearances. And every year, despite being her eldest daughter, I felt like nothing more than an extra in her play. But this year was different. This year, my name wasn't even on the cast list. The invitation arrived in the family group chat. A cheerful message with too many exclamation points, announcing, "Whitmore Thanksgiving dinner. Thursday at 6 p.m. Everyone invited. Can't wait to see you all together, everyone." Everyone, it seemed, except me. I stared at the screen for a long time, rereading the words as if maybe I had missed something. But there it was, plain as day. Nathan and Sophie had confirmed they'd be there. Cousins, uncles, even distant relatives replied with excited emojis. My name never came up and no one asked why. At first I thought it was a mistake. Surely my mother hadn't excluded me so blatantly. So I called her. "Mom," I began cautiously. I saw the message. I didn't see my name mentioned. Her voice, smooth and deliberate, cut through the line. "Elena, I didn't think you'd want to come. You've been distant. And besides, these gatherings are supposed to be cheerful. You always look so serious, like you're judging everyone." I felt my chest tighten. "So you decided for me?" "Don't make this dramatic," she replied coolly. "It's just one dinner. Nathan and Sophie will be there, and that's enough. We don't need tension." Her words landed like ice water down my back. "We don't need tension." In her eyes, my very existence was tension. I wanted to argue, to scream that she was wrong, but what would it change? She had made her decision. Once Margaret Whitmore set her mind on something, there was no undoing it. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, scrolling through photos from past Thanksgivings. In every picture, Nathan grinned in the center. Sophie sparkled at his side, and I stood at the edge, half smiling, half fading into the wallpaper. I remembered carrying trays of food from the kitchen, refilling glasses, cleaning up dishes while my mother bragged about Nathan's latest success or Sophie's brilliance. And I remembered the one year I dared to mention my own promotion. The silence that followed, the way my mother quickly shifted the conversation back to Nathan as though my achievement didn't exist. It had always been this way. I was the shadow, the one who worked hard in silence, while my siblings basked in a light that I had been denied. But this year, sitting in the quiet glow of my apartment, something inside me shifted. Yes, my mother had excluded me. Yes, she had humiliated me, but what she didn't know was that for the past 2 years, I had been building something of my own, something bigger than she could imagine. And this Thanksgiving, while she sat at her carefully decorated table, surrounded by relatives who believed her version of the family, she would discover a truth she could never control. Because this year, the dinner wasn't happening in her house. It was happening in mine. Not my apartment, of course, but the place I had poured every ounce of my effort, sweat, and sleepless nights into. The restaurant, my restaurant, the one she didn't even know I owned. I leaned back in my chair, the faint hum of the city outside my window, and allowed myself the smallest smile. Let her play her games. Let her think she had erased me from the picture. By the end of Thanksgiving night, everyone would see the truth, and Margaret Whitmore would never be able to erase me again. Growing up as a Whitmore meant living in the shadow of perfection, or at least my mother's version of it. Margaret Whitmore had a talent for polishing flaws until they gleamed, but only if she considered you worth polishing. For Nathan and Sophie, she worked tirelessly to make their paths shine. For me, she never bothered. I learned that lesson young. When I was 10, I brought home a painting I had spent weeks on in art class. It wasn't perfect, but I was proud of it. A messy, colorful landscape with a crooked little house under a bright yellow sun. I remember holding it up at the dinner table, waiting for her approval. "That's nice, Elena," she said, without even glancing up from Nathan's science project, which she had been praising for the last 10 minutes. "But you should really spend more time on useful skills. Art doesn't get you anywhere." The painting ended up in a drawer, forgotten, while Nathan's project was displayed in the living room for months. That was how it always went. Sophie's voice lessons, Nathan's sports trophies. Celebrated, photographed, shared with relatives. My accomplishments were brushed aside, as if my efforts were inconvenient interruptions. By the time I was in high school, I stopped expecting recognition. I worked quietly, earned good grades, took part-time jobs, saved money. My mother barely noticed, too busy organizing Sophie's recitals or Nathan's future plans. Yet in that silence, I discovered something powerful. I realized that if no one was going to applaud me, I didn't need their applause. I could build my own worth, brick by brick, without waiting for their validation. College was my escape. I studied business and hospitality, working late shifts at diners and catering halls, learning everything about the industry. While Sophie posted selfies and Nathan burned through his allowance, I was pouring coffee for strangers at 2 a.m, figuring out how kitchens ran, how managers handled staff, how customers reacted to every detail. It was exhausting. Some nights I went to bed with aching feet and hands raw from scrubbing dishes. But for the first time, I felt alive. I wasn't just surviving my family's neglect. I was shaping something of my own. I kept my progress quiet. The Whitmores never asked, and I never volunteered. Let them think I was aimless, bitter, too serious. Their ignorance became my shield. The turning point came when I was 28. I had saved enough, partnered with a mentor I met in the industry, and signed papers that made me co-owner of a restaurant. Within a year, my mentor retired, and the title shifted entirely to me. I remember standing in that gleaming dining room after hours, the tables perfectly set, the chandeliers glittering above. The air smelled faintly of roasted herbs and fresh bread. For the first time in my life, I belonged somewhere. And not just anywhere, I owned it. Still, I never told my family. Why should I? To Margaret, success only mattered if it came from Nathan or Sophie. To them, I was still the outsider, the one they barely mentioned at holiday gatherings. That was fine. I had patience. Every dismissive comment, every ignored achievement, every invitation that never came, I stored it away like fuel. And when I saw that Thanksgiving message excluding me once again, I knew the time had come to use it. This year, Margaret wanted her flawless performance. She wanted the relatives gathered, the laughter, the photographs, the image of a perfect Whitmore family. What she didn't realize was that the stage she had chosen, the restaurant she so proudly reserved, was mine. Her show would go on, but I would be the one running it. And when the curtain lifted, the truth would be revealed in front of every single person she had used to humiliate me. I wasn't just the forgotten daughter anymore. I was the one writing the final act. Margaret Whitmore thrived on appearances. To her, perfection wasn't optional, it was survival. Every holiday was an opportunity to display not just her family, but her control over it. The Whitmores, polished and enviable, a family others might whisper about with admiration. In her eyes, Thanksgiving was her crowning jewel. Weeks before the holiday, she was already deep in planning. Her group messages overflowed with details, table settings, floral arrangements, and an exhaustive list of side dishes that no one ever finished. "We'll need golden chargers under the dinner plates this year," she wrote one morning. "And Nathan, wear the navy suit." "It makes you look accomplished," Nathan, of course, agreed with little more than a thumbs-up emoji, his role as golden child unquestioned. Sophie chimed in with enthusiasm, offering to help pick her mother's dress. It was a performance they all knew by heart. This year, Margaret wanted to elevate the show. Hosting at home wasn't enough anymore. She wanted glamour, something her neighbors couldn't compete with. That was why she called the restaurant downtown, the one she'd heard glowing reviews about from her friends at the country club. They say it's elegant, she told Aunt Carolyn over the phone, her voice rich with pride. The service is flawless. It's perfect for Thanksgiving dinner. My family deserves the best, Carolyn, ever gentle, asked. Did you speak with Elena about it? Margaret's pause was deliberate. Elena? Oh no, she's not really part of these gatherings anymore. It's better this way. Less conflict. The words rolled off her tongue with practiced ease, though even she felt a small tug in her chest. She ignored it quickly. Doubt was not part of her performance. By the time Thanksgiving week arrived, Margaret had arranged everything. She ordered customized menus with the Whitmore family Thanksgiving printed across the top in elegant script. She chose wine pairings, called in favors to secure the best seating near the grand fireplace, and even coordinated outfits with Sophie to ensure the photographs would shine. The narrative she envisioned was simple: a radiant mother, her successful children, a united family. She imagined the whispers of admiration from distant relatives, the envy in their eyes as they snapped photos of the glittering chandeliers, the glowing food, the perfect smiles, and above all, she imagined Elena's absence. To Margaret, removing her eldest daughter wasn't cruelty. It was efficiency. Elena had always been the shadow in her carefully lit stage. Too quiet, too serious, too unwilling to play her role. Excluding her simply meant eliminating imperfections. On Thanksgiving morning, Margaret stood before her mirror in a silk burgundy dress, Sophie adjusting the necklace around her throat. Perfect, Sophie said with a smile. You look like you own the place. Margaret's lips curled. Well, in a way, I do. Tonight, everyone will see what it means to be a Whitmore. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was that the stage she had claimed so proudly wasn't hers at all. The chandeliers she dreamed of impressing her guests with, they belonged to me. The staff she praised for their flawless service, they answered to me. The restaurant she believed would crown her as the flawless matriarch, it was my kingdom. And as she prepared for the performance of her life, I was already waiting in the wings, ready to let the curtain rise on the truth she had spent decades trying to bury. Thanksgiving morning at the restaurant buzzed with energy. The kitchen was alive with motion. The hiss of pans, the sharp rhythm of knives against cutting boards, the soft hum of ovens working overtime. The scent of roasted turkey and buttered herbs filled the air, weaving through every corner of the dining room. To the staff, this was just another holiday service, but for me, it was far more. I moved quietly through the restaurant, checking table settings, running my fingers over the polished silverware, straightening a wineglass here, a folded napkin there. Every detail mattered. Tonight wasn't only about flawless service, it was about control. For once in my life, the narrative wouldn't belong to my mother. It would belong to me. Everything looks perfect, Miss Whitmore, said Daniel, the maitre d', giving me a respectful nod. Thank you, I replied softly. My voice was steady, but inside, my chest thrummed with anticipation. Tonight, my family would finally see me. Not as the afterthought, not as the shadow, but as the woman who had built something none of them could take away. By late afternoon, the first guests began to arrive. Through the wide glass doors, I saw familiar faces, aunts, uncles, cousins, stepping into the glow of chandeliers, shedding their coats with delighted expressions. They admired the decor, whispered to one another about how beautiful everything looked. I stayed in the background, watching from near the service counter. For now, I was invisible. And then they appeared. Margaret walked in first, her burgundy dress gleaming under the soft light, Sophie trailing behind with her usual polished grace. Nathan swaggered in soon after, adjusting his cufflinks as though the evening were about him alone. Their laughter carried across the room, warm and artificial, filling the air with the performance they had perfected for years. I watched as my mother's eyes scanned the restaurant, her lips curling into a satisfied smile. She basked in the admiration of arriving relatives, answering their compliments as if she had orchestrated the beauty of the room herself. "This place is magnificent," one aunt gushed. "Margaret, how on earth did you find it?" "Oh, I have my ways," my mother said with a coy laugh, tilting her head just so. "Only the best for my family." The irony cut deep, but I didn't flinch. Let her take her bow. Let her believe this was her triumph. As the family settled into their seats, I moved discreetly into the kitchen, steadying my breath. Tonight wasn't about confrontation, not yet. It was about patience, timing, letting the truth reveal itself when the weight of their arrogance was at its heaviest. From behind the door, I could hear their voices spilling into the dining room. Laughter, chatter, the familiar rhythm of a Whitmore holiday. And underneath it all, the gnawing ache I had carried since childhood. The sound of my family celebrating, as though I had never existed. But this time, it was different. I wasn't locked outside the house, waiting for scraps of belonging. I wasn't staring at photos on social media, wishing for a place at their table. I was here. I was the one who had set the table they were dining at. The thought steadied me. I straightened my jacket, adjusted the gold name pin on my lapel. Soon enough, they would know the truth. But for now, I let them revel in their illusion. Because nothing makes a reveal sweeter than the silence that follows the realization. And I was ready to savor every second of it. The dining room glowed beneath the chandeliers, their light casting golden patterns across polished mahogany tables. Waiters moved gracefully between chairs, pouring wine into crystal glasses, setting down baskets of warm bread that steamed against the cool November air drifting in from the entryway. The Whitmore family was in full performance mode. From my vantage point near the edge of the dining room, I could see it unfold like a play I had seen too many times before. My mother, Margaret, sat at the head of the long table, her burgundy dress shimmering whenever she moved her hands to gesture dramatically. Her voice rose above the others with practiced ease. The matriarch, commanding attention without ever needing to demand it outright. "Nathan's business prospects are looking better than ever," she announced, her tone swelling with pride. "He has such a sharp mind for opportunity. Just wait until next year. I'm certain we'll be celebrating even bigger accomplishments." Nathan smirked modestly, though his eyes sparkled with self-satisfaction. Relatives clapped him on the back, praising his drive, though I knew better. His opportunities had been handed to him, funded by my parents' resources, covered whenever he stumbled. "And Sophie," Margaret continued, placing a hand delicately over her younger daughter's wrist, "has been invited to perform in another recital this spring. Her voice has matured so beautifully. Truly, she's a gift." Sophie flushed with practiced humility, lowering her eyes even as she relished the chorus of compliments. Around the table, glasses clinked, laughter filled the air, and every story that was told seemed to polish their image further. It was exactly what my mother wanted. A flawless portrait of her family, a night of admiration she could feed on for months. What none of them noticed, or perhaps chose not to see, was the empty space where I should have been. No one asked, no one wondered aloud. My name was not spoken, as though erasing me from the gathering was easier than acknowledging I existed. But I was there, not at the table, not in their carefully posed photographs, but standing just out of view, watching as they played their roles. I noticed every detail, how Margaret adjusted her posture whenever someone new entered the room, her smile widening just slightly, her laugh becoming a fraction too sharp, how Nathan dominated conversations with half-true stories of success, his words gilded in exaggeration, how Sophie leaned into compliments, her head tilted just enough to seem demure while her eyes glittered with pride. It was theater, and they were seasoned actors. But I was no longer the forgotten audience member. From the kitchen doors, I caught glimpses of the waitstaff. My staff, moving with precision, their uniforms crisp, their expressions professional. Every dish that left the kitchen bore my mark, every glass of wine chosen by me. My mother thought she had orchestrated this evening, but in truth, she was only a guest on my stage. At one point, Aunt Caroline caught sight of me. Her eyes widened slightly, recognition dawning, but I raised a finger to my lips and shook my head. She hesitated, then gave me the smallest nod, her lips curving into a secret smile. Unlike the others, she had always suspected there was more to me than my mother allowed anyone to see. As dinner was served, golden roast turkey, buttery mashed potatoes, green beans glistening with almonds, Margaret lifted her glass and made a toast. "To family," she declared, her eyes sweeping proudly over Nathan and Sophie. The Whitmores have always known how to endure, how to succeed, how to shine. Glasses lifted, voices echoed, and I felt the irony press against my chest like a weight. Because in that moment, my mother was right. The Whitmores did know how to endure, but she had no idea just how much I had endured. And soon she would learn that true success didn't belong to the ones who performed the loudest. It belonged to the one who had been working quietly in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to step into the light. The longer the night stretched, the more the family's performance began to strain. At first, everything gleamed. The food, the laughter, the wine flowing freely. But perfection is fragile, and under the weight of too many eyes, too much pride, even the smoothest masks start to slip. I watched it happen from the quiet edges of the room. Nathan had been bragging again, spinning tales about a new business deal he had supposedly closed. His voice grew louder with each glass of wine, his hands sweeping in wide gestures as he described partnerships that sounded increasingly vague. "That's impressive, Nathan," one uncle said with a chuckle. "What company did you say you were working with?" Nathan blinked, then smirked. "Oh, private investors. Can't really share names yet. Confidential." It was the same excuse he always used when details got too thin. I could see Aunt Caroline's brow arch slightly, her eyes shifting toward me across the room. She knew, even if she didn't say it aloud, that my brother's success was little more than smoke. Meanwhile, Sophie had been basking in the glow of compliments about her upcoming recital, but she had overplayed her modesty. Each time someone praised her, she lowered her eyes with exaggerated grace, only to peek up again, checking to make sure admiration lingered. It was a small crack, but one that revealed how desperately she needed the validation. And then there was my mother. Margaret had been in her element all evening, her smile wide, her posture regal. But even she began to show signs of strain. "Thait ha." Compliments were flowing, yes, but not as freely as she wanted. Some of the relatives had started asking about Elena, me. "Where's Elena tonight?" one cousin asked, looking around curiously. Margaret's smile faltered for only a moment, but I caught it. "Oh, Elena," she replied lightly, waving a hand as if brushing away an inconvenience. "She's busy. Work, I suppose. She doesn't enjoy these gatherings the way the rest of us do. Always so serious, always so tired. Honestly, it's better for everyone this way." The cousin nodded politely, but there was no enthusiasm in their eyes. The comment had landed poorly, and Margaret knew it. She quickly changed the subject, praising Sophie's accomplishments with renewed fervor. From where I stood, the cracks glittered like fractures in glass. Small, nearly invisible to those caught up in the noise of the evening, but to me, they were bright as day. I felt a steady calm rise in me as I moved through the kitchen, checking on the staff, adjusting the pacing of courses. My hands grazed the back of a leather chair as I returned to the dining room's edge, and for a moment, I allowed myself to take in the full picture. They were seated at my table, eating food prepared under my watch, drinking wine I had chosen. And still, they dismissed me, erased me, diminished me. It was almost poetic. As dessert trays began to make their way out of the kitchen, pumpkin pie, pecan tart, small plates of sugared cranberries, I felt my moment drawing closer. The family was warm with food and drink, their guards lowered, their arrogance still thick but beginning to thin. Aunt Caroline caught my eye again, her expression quiet but knowing. She didn't speak, didn't give me away, but the way her lips curved into the faintest smile told me she was ready. She would stand by me when the time came. I drew a slow breath, steadying my pulse. I had waited years for this. Every ignored achievement, every cruel dismissal, every whispered comment that I was too much or not enough had brought me here. The cracks in their performance had started to show, and soon I would shatter the glass entirely. Chapter 6 complete, approximately 5,500 characters. Now the Whitmore perfect show is starting to wobble. Margaret is forced to cover up Elena's absence. Nathan looks like a fraud. Sophie craves attention. Elena is calm, waiting for the right strike. The plates of pumpkin pie had barely touched the table when the moment came. Laughter rolled through the dining room, warm and careless, wrapping the Whitmores in a cocoon of arrogance they didn't even realize was cracking. I stood near the corner, my hands resting lightly against the service station, my breath steady but deep. For years, I had been invisible at these gatherings. Tonight, invisibility was my weapon. They hadn't noticed me, hadn't even thought to look, and that was about to change. "Excuse me," I said, my voice calm but carrying across the room. Every head turned. The room went silent in a way I had never experienced before. Forks froze midair. Conversation cut off mid-laugh. Eyes blinked in unison, first searching for the source of the voice, then landing on me. There I was, not in the shadows, not erased, but standing tall beneath the chandeliers that gleamed above. "Elena!" Margaret's voice faltered for the first time that night. Her smile wavered, brittle at the edges. "What are you doing here?" I let the silence stretch, savoring it. The shock painted across her face was more satisfying than any applause could ever be. "I live here," I said softly, my tone even, deliberate. "This is my place." Confusion rippled across the table. A cousin frowned. Sophie's fork slipped against her plate, and Nathan leaned back with a scoff, as if I had made a tasteless joke. Margaret recovered quickly, her composure snapping back into place. "That's enough, Elena. If you wanted to attend, you could have said something, but barging in and making a scene—" "This isn't a scene," I interrupted, my voice firmer now. "This is the truth. The restaurant you're sitting in, the one you've been so proud to claim as your find, it belongs to me. I own it. Every detail, every dish, every moment of service tonight, it's mine." A stunned silence fell again, thicker this time. "No, that's impossible," Sophie blurted out. Her face flushed. "Mom booked this place weeks ago. She spoke to the manager." I nodded slowly. "She did. And the manager works for me." Eyes widened. Whispers broke out at the table, cousins leaning toward one another, aunts covering their mouths in disbelief. Aunt Caroline, however, sat straighter, her expression calm but glowing with quiet pride. Nathan laughed, though the sound was hollow. "So what? You're saying you run a restaurant now? Since when?" "Since years of hard work, while you all pretended I didn't exist," I replied evenly. "While you chased empty opportunities and Sophie played for applause, I was building something real. And tonight, you're sitting inside it." Margaret's mask cracked again. She gripped her wine glass, her knuckles pale against the crystal stem. "You're lying," she said, though her voice trembled. "You're trying to embarrass me." I stepped closer, my heels clicking against the polished floor, the sound sharp in the silence. "No, Mother. You did that yourself the moment you decided I wasn't worth inviting. The difference is tonight, everyone gets to see who I really am." Her eyes darted around the table, searching for support, but the room had shifted. The performance she had worked so hard to maintain was unraveling. Relatives were no longer gazing at her with admiration. They were staring at me, their whispers threading the air like a tide turning. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the shadow at the edge of their vision. I was the light that commanded it. And Margaret Whitmore, queen of appearances, was finally realizing her crown had slipped. For a moment, no one breathed. The chandeliers sparkled above, the candles flickered against crystal glasses, and the only sound in the room was the hum of disbelief. Then Margaret laughed. It wasn't a warm laugh, not even her practiced social one. It was sharp, brittle, and just a little too loud. "Elena," she said, shaking her head as though scolding a child. "You've always had such an imagination. Really, you shouldn't interrupt dinner with these little fantasies. You'll only embarrass yourself." I held her gaze, unblinking. "This isn't a fantasy. It's a fact. And the longer you deny it, the more foolish you'll look." Her smile faltered again, and a hint of anger flickered behind her eyes. But Margaret Whitmore had never been one to back down easily, especially not with an audience. "Do you all hear this?" she said, turning to the table, forcing a laugh. "She thinks she owns this place. As if Elena has ever managed to hold down anything serious. Honestly, she's always been, well, a little dramatic. You know how she is." The words stung, not because they were true, but because I had heard them all my life. Too serious, too dramatic, too much, or never enough. But this time, I didn't flinch. From across the table, Aunt Caroline's voice cut through, calm but firm. "I don't think she's joking, Margaret." The room shifted, eyes turned back to me, searching, questioning. Nathan leaned forward, his smirk faltering. "Prove it," he said. "If this place is really yours, then prove it." I nodded once, signaling to Daniel, the maitre d'. He stepped forward instantly, bowing his head slightly. "Yes, Ms. Whitmore?" The silence that followed was deafening. Sophie's fork clattered against her plate. Nathan's jaw fell open, his face flushing red. And Margaret, my mother, the woman who had spent her life orchestrating every detail to make herself appear flawless, froze completely. "Miss Whitmore," she repeated weakly, her voice cracking. "Yes," Daniel said, straightening his jacket. "Elena Whitmore is the sole owner of this establishment. Every reservation, every detail of service tonight was handled under her direction. We're honored to host your family at her request." The room erupted. Cousins gasped, uncles exchanged wide-eyed looks, whispers filled the air. Some glanced at me with shock, others with dawning admiration. A few even clapped their hands together in astonishment, as though they couldn't contain their surprise. Margaret's face drained of color. She looked from Daniel to me, her lips parting and closing like she couldn't form words. Finally, she found her voice, sharp, brittle, desperate. "This is absurd," she spat. "You've tricked them somehow. Elena, stop this nonsense before you humiliate yourself further." But the room wasn't with her anymore. The performance she had polished so carefully was collapsing piece by piece, her denial only making it worse. I stepped closer, my voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the murmurs. "No, Mother. This isn't humiliation. This is justice. For every holiday where I was invisible, for every birthday where my achievements were ignored, for every time you looked at Nathan and Sophie like they were your only children and treated me like nothing. Tonight, you don't get to erase me. Tonight, you sit at my table." The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Margaret's hands trembled against the tablecloth, her carefully constructed mask shattered. And for the first time in my life, I saw it. The truth she had always hidden behind pride and control. Fear. The silence around the table was suffocating. For a woman like Margaret Whitmore, silence was the worst kind of enemy. She had always thrived on applause, laughter, admiration. Now, faced with stunned eyes and whispers she couldn't control, she began to unravel. Her wine glass trembled in her hand. "You've always been jealous, Elena," she said, her voice rising. "Jealous of Nathan, jealous of Sophie, jealous of everything you could never have. And now you're inventing this story to make yourself look important." "Margaret," Aunt Caroline said sharply, her eyes narrowing. "It isn't a story. The staff just confirmed it. Elena owns this restaurant. Why can't you be proud of her?" "Proud?" Margaret's voice cracked into a bitter laugh. "Of what? Of her pretending? Of her hiding in kitchens while her siblings do real work? Nathan has a future, Sophie has talent, and Elna has bitterness. That's all she's ever had. The words hit like daggers, but this time I didn't bleed. I had heard them before, every variation of them, for years. They no longer wounded, they revealed. Nathan shifted uncomfortably, his smirk gone. Sophie looked down at her plate, her face pale. The relatives who once nodded along to Margaret's declarations now sat in uneasy silence. I stepped forward, my voice cutting through her tirade like a blade. You've spent your entire life trying to build a perfect family, Mother. But the truth is, you built a cage. Nathan and Sophie are trapped in your need for attention, your obsession with appearances. And me? You tried to erase me because I didn't play your game. Her eyes snapped to mine, fury burning hot. Don't you dare lecture me. I gave you life, Elena. I gave you everything. No, I said calmly. You gave me nothing. And that nothing is what taught me how to build something real. You erased me from your table, but I created one of my own. And tonight, you're sitting at it. Not as the queen you've always imagined yourself to be. Just as a guest gasps echoed around the table, a cousin whispered, "She's right," while another nodded slowly. The tide had shifted completely. The current no longer carrying Margaret's performance, but pulling it under. Margaret slammed her hand against the table, rattling the silverware. "You think this makes you better than me?" she hissed. "You'll never be better. You'll always be the forgotten one. No restaurant can change that." I leaned forward, my voice low but unwavering. "Look around you, Mother. Do I look forgotten?" Every pair of eyes in the room was on me. Not Nathan, not Sophie. Me. The power that Margaret had clung to for so long, the crown she had polished for herself year after year, slipped from her head that night. Not because I tore it away, but because she had nothing left to hold it in place. And in the heavy silence that followed, I knew the performance was over. The Whitmore stage no longer belonged to her. It belonged to me. The dining room was still. The clatter of forks and the hum of laughter were gone, replaced by the quiet weight of truth. My family sat frozen, the perfect picture Margaret had painted shattered at their feet. I stood taller, feeling the strength of every year I had been dismissed pressing into this moment. My heart was steady, my voice was clear. "For years you told me I was nothing," I said, scanning the faces at the table. At birthdays, at holidays, at every dinner just like this one, you reminded me that I didn't measure up. And I believed it for a long time. But tonight, I don't need your approval. I don't need your applause, because I know exactly who I am. I let my gaze land on Margaret. Her face was pale, her lips pressed so tightly they quivered. The woman who had spent her life commanding every room now sat silent in one she could no longer control. "This restaurant is mine," I continued, "built with my hands, my sacrifices, my choices. Every light above you, every plate in front of you, every drop of wine in your glass exists because of me. You didn't invite me here tonight, Mother. I invited you." Whispers swelled again. Relatives exchanging looks, nodding slowly, their admiration now directed fully at me. Margaret opened her mouth, but no words came. For once she had no performance left, no script to lean on. I turned to Daniel, the maitre d'. "Please make sure dessert is served with the house specialty coffee. On the house. My family should enjoy the full experience tonight." "Yes, Miss Whitmore," he said with a small smile, bowing slightly before heading to the kitchen. The family shifted uncomfortably, the weight of the truth settling in. Aunt Caroline raised her glass quietly, her voice soft but strong. "To Elena," she said. The words hung in the air like a spark. Slowly, one by one, glasses lifted, some out of admiration, some out of obligation, but all acknowledging what Margaret could no longer deny. I didn't smile, not fully, but I nodded, letting the toast wash over me. Not as the forgotten daughter, but as the woman who had finally taken her place. Margaret pushed her chair back suddenly, her heels scraping against the polished floor. She stood stiff, her chin trembling. For a moment, I thought she might lash out again, but she didn't. She simply turned and walked out, her burgundy dress swaying behind her, the sound of the door closing like the final act of a play. No one followed her. I exhaled, the knot in my chest loosening after years of silence. For once, I wasn't the shadow cast by my family's spotlight. I was the light itself. And as I stood in the restaurant I had built, my stage, my story, my triumph, I knew the truth had been written clearly in every eye around the table. The Whitmore legacy no longer belonged to Margaret. It belonged to me.